Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Jim O'Keefe here, present, accounted for, and here for another bit of reading. It is great to see you. I hope beyond hope you've had a wonderful weekend like myself. Had a sweet one, went out into the woods, enjoyed some woods time with my sweetheart. Sunshine, birds, animals, trees starting to bud, all that stuff, things coming out from the ground. Oh, it was wonderful. Long hikes, time to enjoy ourselves. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's here and we are here, and it is time for a little more time with Gregor the Overlander by Suzanne Collins. So ladies and gentlemen, we are in somewhere inside chapter 10, if I am not mistaken. We have returned to the castle. Vicus has allowed for a little bit of check-in after the attempted runaway, the potential injuries to certain bats and to certain underlanders, right? So some of these underlanders were there. And if I'm not mistaken, Vicus was about ready to explain the history of how the underlanders became the underlanders, right? There was a little bit of the idea the first 50 years, they were kind of seeing whether or not it was going to work to be underneath the ground. They found out, obviously, that they were, and then they committed themselves to being underground. So, if I am not mistaken, we last were at a part where we were saying, do you really think it is he? That's right, we finished when there was this question that they kept kind of pointing at Gregor as potentially being the him that they've been waiting for quite some time. So this is Luxa. Do you really think it is he? She said. Who? He? Who? Said Gregor. He had a bad feeling about where this conversation was going. Vicus rose from the table. Come, he said, and headed out the door. Let's get into this now. Gregor got up, willing his stiff arms to carry boots. He and Luxa reached the door at the same time. Stopped. After you, he said. She glanced at him sideways and followed Vicus. The halls were lined with underlanders who watched them pass in silence, then broke into whispers. They did not have far to go before Vicus stopped at a polished wooden door. Gregor realized it was the first wooden thing that he'd seen in the Underland. What had Vicus said about something being as rare as trees? For trees, you needed lots of light. So how would they grow here? Vicus pulled out a key and opened the door. He took a torch from the holder in the hall and led the way in. Gregor stepped into a room that seemed to be an empty stone cube. On every surface were carvings, not just the walls, but the floor and the ceiling too. These weren't the frolicking animals he'd seen elsewhere in Regalia. These were words. Tiny words that must have taken forever to chisel in stone. A, B, C, said Boot, which is what she always said when she saw letters. A, B, C, D, she added for emphasis. These are the prophecies of Bartholomew of Sandwich, said Vicus. Once we sealed the gates, he devoted the rest of his life to recording them. I bet he did, thought Gregor. It sounded like just the kind of thing a crazy old sandwich would do. Drag a bunch of people underground and then lock himself in a room and chip out more crazy stuff on the walls. So what do you mean, prophecies? Asked Gregor. Although he knew what prophecies were. They were predictions of what would happen in the future. Most religions had them, and his grandma loved a book of them by a guy named Nostra something. To hear her talk, the future was pretty depressing. Sandwich was a visionary, said Vicus. He foretold many things that have happened to our people. And a bunch that haven't? Asked Gregor, trying to sound innocent. He hadn't ruled out prophecies entirely, but he was skeptical about anything Sandwich came up with. Besides, even if someone told you something that would happen in the future, what could you do about it? Some we have not yet unraveled, admitted Vicus. He foretold my parents' end, said He foretold my parents' end, said Luxa sorrowfully, running her fingers over part of the wall. There was no mystery in that. Vicus put his arm around her and looked at the wall. No, he agreed softly. That was as clear as water. That's a really obvious simile, as clear as water. Gregor felt awful about the 10th time that night. From now on, whatever he thought, he would try to talk about the prophecies with honor and respect. But there is one that hangs most heavily over our heads. It is called the prophecy of Gray. For we know not whether it be fair or foul, said Vicus. We do know that it was to Sandwich the most sacred and maddening of his visions. For he could never see the outcome, although it came to him many, many times. Vicus gestured to a small oil lamp that illuminated a panel of the wall. It was the only light in the whole room beside the torch. Maybe they kept it burning constantly. Will you read? Asked Vicus, and Gregor approached the panel. The prophecy was written like a poem, in 4 parts. Some of the lettering was odd, but he could make it out. A, B, C, said Boots, touching the letters. Gregor began to read. Beware, Underlanders. Time hangs by a thread. The hunters are hunted. White water runs red. The gnawers will strike to extinguish the rest. The hope of the hopeless resides in a quest. An overland warrior, a son of the sun, may bring us back light. He may bring us back none. But gather your neighbors and follow his call, or rats will most surely devour us all. 2 over 2 under of royal descent, 2 flyers, 2 crawlers, 2 spinners ascent. 1 gnawer beside and 1 lost up ahead, and 8 will be left when we count up the dead. The last who will die must decide where he stands. The fate of the 8 is contained in his hands. So bid him take care, bid him look where he leaps, as life may be death, and death life again reaps. Gregor finished the poem and didn't quite know what to say. He blurted out, What's it mean? Vicus shook his head. No one knows for certain. It tells of a dark time when the future of our people is undecided. It calls for a journey, not just of humans, but of many creatures, which may lead either to salvation or ruin. The journey will be led by an Overlander. Yeah, well, I got that part, this warrior guy, he said. You ask why the rats hate Overlanders so deeply? It is because they know one will be the warrior of the prophecy, said Vicus. Ah, I see, said Gregor. So when's he coming? Vicus fixed his eyes on Gregor. I believe he has already arrived. Go, go, go. The prophecy, right? The prophecy says that an Overlander will run the show, and then we will find out what happens next. Chapter 11. Gregor awoke from a fitful sleep. Images of blood-red rivers, his dad surrounded by rats, and Boots falling into bottomless caverns had woven in and out of his dreams all night long. Oh yeah, and there was that warrior thing from yesterday. He had tried to tell them when Vicus had implied that he was the warrior in the prophecy of Gray. Gregor had actually laughed, but the man was serious. You've got the wrong guy, Gregor had said. Really, I promise, I am no warrior. Why pretend and get their hopes up? Samurai warriors, Apache warriors, African warriors, medieval warriors. He'd seen movies. He'd read books. He didn't in any way resemble any kind of warrior. First of all, they were all grown up, and they usually had a lot of special weapons. Gregor was 11, and unless you counted a 2-year-old sister as a special weapon, he'd come empty-handed. Also, Gregor was not into fighting. He'd fight back if someone jumped him at school, but that didn't happen very often. He wasn't all that big, but he moved fast, and people didn't like to mess with him. Sometimes, if he'd stepped in a bunch of guys were pounding a small kid, sometimes he'd step in and if a bunch of guys were pounding a small kid, he hated seeing that. But he never picked fights and wasn't fighting what warriors mainly did. And wasn't fighting what warriors mainly did? Sorry, there was a question mark at the end. Vicus and Luxa had listened to his protests. He thought he might have convinced Luxa. She didn't have a very high opinion of him anyway. But Vicus was much more persistent. How many Overlanders survived the fall to the Underland? do you suppose? I would guess a tenth. And how many survived the rats after that? Perhaps another 10. So out of 1,000 Overlanders, let us say 10 survive. How passing strange is it that not only your father, but you and your sister came alive to us, said Vicus. I guess it's kind of strange, admitted Gregor. But I don't see why that makes me a warrior. You will when you better understand the prophecy, said Vicus. Each person carries their own destiny. These walls tell of our destiny, and your destiny, Gregor, requires you to play a role in it. I don't know about this destiny thing, said Gregor. I mean, my dad and Boots and I, we all have the same laundry room, and we landed somewhere pretty close to you, so I'm thinking it's more of a coincidence. I'd like to help, but you guys are probably going to have to wait a little longer for your warrior. Vicus just smiled and said that they would put it before the council in the morning, this morning. Now, despite all of his worries, and he had plenty of those, Gregor couldn't deny a feeling of giddy happiness that shot through him periodically. His dad was alive. Almost instantly, another wave of anxiety would rush over him. Yeah, he's alive, but imprisoned by rats. Still, his grandma always said, where there's life, there's hope. Boom. Hold on to that. Where there's life, there's hope. Boy, wouldn't his grandma love it if she knew he was talked about in a prophecy? But of course, that wasn't him. That was some warrior guy who would hopefully make an appearance really soon and help him get his dad free. That was his main goal right now. How could he rescue his dad? The curtain pulled open and Gregor squinted at the light. Marith stood in the hallway. The swelling in his face had gone down, but his bruises were going to be there for quite some time. Gregor wondered if the guard was still angry with him, but Marith sounded calm. Gregor the Overlander, the council requests your presence, he said. If you make haste, you may wash and eat first. Okay, said Gregor. He started to rise and realized Boots' head was cradled on his arm. He eased himself up without waking her. What about Boots? She may sleep on, said Marith. Dulcet will watch over her. Gregor bathed quickly and dressed in fresh clothes. Marith led him to a small room where a meal was laid out, then stood watch at the door. Hey, Marith, he said, drawing the guard's attention. How is everybody? I mean, Perdita and the bats. Are they okay? Perdita has woken finally. The bats will mend, said Marith evenly. Oh, that's great, said Gregor with relief. After his father's situation, the thing pressing most on him had been the condition of the Underlanders. He wolfed down bread, butter, and a mushroom omelet. He drank hot tea made of some sort of herb, and energy seemed to pour through him. Are you ready to face the council? Asked Marith, seeing his empty plate. All set, said Gregor, springing up. He felt better than he had since he'd reached the Underland. News of his dad, the Underlander's recovery, sleep, and food had revived him. The council, a group of a dozen older Underlanders, had gathered at a round table in a round room off the high hall. The council, a group of a dozen older Underlanders, had gathered at a round table in a room off the high hall. That's one sentence. That's a lot. Gregor saw Vicus and Sullivan, who gave him an encouraging smile. Luxa was also there, looking tired and defiant. Gregor bet she'd been chewed out for joining the rescue party last night. He was sure she hadn't acted one bit sorry. Vicus introduced the people around the table. They all had funny-sounding names that Gregor immediately forgot. The council began to ask him questions, all kinds of things, like when he was born, and did he know how to swim, and what he did in the Overland. He couldn't figure out why a lot of the stuff was important. Did it really matter that his favorite color was green? But a couple of Underlanders were scribbling down every word he said like it was golden. After a while, the council seemed to forget he was there, and they argued amongst themselves. He caught phrases like, son of the sun, and white water runs red, and knew that they were talking about the prophecy. Excuse me, he finally broke in. I guess Vicus didn't tell you, but I'm not the warrior. Look, please, what I really need is for you guys to help me bring my dad home. Everyone at the table stared at him for a moment and then began to talk with greater excitement. Now he kept hearing the words, follow his call, follow his call, Finally, Vicus rapped on the table for order. Members of the council, we must decide. Here sits Gregor the Overlander. Who counts him the warrior of the prophecy of Greg? 10 of the 12 raised their hands. Luxa kept her hand on the table. Either she didn't think he was the warrior, or she wasn't allowed to vote. Probably both. We believe you to be the warrior, said Vicus. If you call us to help you regain your father, then we answer your call. They were going to help him. Who cared why? Okay, great, said Gregor. Whatever it takes. I believe what you want. That's fine. We must begin the journey with all haste, said Vicus. I'm ready, said Gregor eagerly. Let me just get boots and we can go. Ah, yes, the baby, said Sullivan. And another round of arguments ensued. Wait, shouted Vicus. This costs much time, Gregor. We do not know the prophecy includes your sister. What? Said Gregor. He couldn't remember the prophecy very well. Whoa, spill. Elbows and, soda cans. I gotta be careful with them. Gotta take a break sometimes, right? Sorry, wait, shouted Vicus. This costs much time, Gregor. We do not know that the prophecy includes your sister. What? Said Gregor. He couldn't remember the prophecy very well. He had to ask Vicus if he could get in the room and read it again. The prophecy mentions 12 beings. Only 2 are described as Overlanders. You and your father fill that number, said Sullivan. The prophecy also speaks of 1 lost. That 1 may be your father, in which case Boots is the second Overlander. But it may also be a rat, said Vicus. The journey will be difficult. The prophecy warns that 4 of the 12 will lose life. It may be wisest to leave Boots here. From around the table came a general murmur of assent. Gregor's head began to swim. Leave Boots? Leave her here in Regalia? With the Underlanders? He couldn't do that. It wasn't that he thought that they'd mistreat her, but she'd be so lonely, and what if he and his dad didn't make it back? She'd never get home. Still, he knew how vicious the rats were, and they would be hunting him to the last rat. He didn't know what to do. He looked at the set faces and thought the Underlanders had already decided to split them up. Stay together. Wasn't that what his mom always told him when he took his sister out? Stay together. Then he noticed Luxa was avoiding his gaze. She had intertwined her fingers on the stone table before her and was staring at them intensely. What would you do if it were your sister, Luxa? Sorry, what would you do if it was your sister, Luxa? He asked. The room got very quiet. He could tell the council didn't want to hear her opinion. I have no sister, Overlander, said Luxa. Gregor felt disappointed. He heard a murmur of approval from some of the council members. Luxa's eyes flashed around the table, and she scowled. But if I did, and I were you, she said passionately, I would never take my eyes off her. He said thank you. But he didn't think she could hear him in the loud round of objections that poured out from the council. He raised his voice. If Boots doesn't go, I don't go. The room was in an uproar when a bat veered through the doorway, crashed into the table, silencing everyone. A ghostly woman slumped over the bat, pressing her hands to her chest to stem the flow of blood. One of the bat's wings folded in, but the other extended at an awkward angle, clearly broken. Anshel is dead. Daphne is dead. The rats found Shed, Fangor. King Gorger has launched his armies. They come for us, gasped the woman. Vicus caught the woman as she collapsed. How many, Kita? He asked. Many, she whispered. Many rats. And she went limp. Oh, they're on their way. The attack is imminent. Bats, battles, blood, boots, lots of bees, Gregor, the prophecy, all these things. Can we keep going? Yeah, we've got time, right? It's 19, chapter 12. Sound the alarm, shouted Vicus, and the place exploded in frantic activity. Horns began blowing. People rushed in and out. Bats swooped in for orders and disappeared again without taking time to land. Everyone ignored Gregor as they shifted into emergency mode. He wanted to ask Vicus what was going on, but the old man stood in the high hall in a blur of bat wings giving commands. Gregor went out on a balcony and could see Regalia swarming like a beehive. Many rats were coming. The Underlanders were going into defense mode. Suddenly he realized that they were at war. The terrifying thought, and at the height of the balcony, made Gregor lightheaded. As he stumbled back inside, a strong hand caught his arm. "Gregor, the Overlander, prepare yourself, for we leave shortly," said Vicus. "For where? Where are we going?" asked Gregor. "To rescue your father," said Vicus. "Now? We can go with the rats attacking?" said Gregor. "I mean, there's a war starting, right?" "Not any war. We believe it is the war foretold in the prophecy of Gray, the one that may bring about the complete annihilation of our people," said Vicus. "Pursuing the quest for your father is our best hope of surviving," said Vicus. "I can take Boots, right?" asked Gregor. I mean, I'm taking her," he corrected himself. "Yes, Boots shall come," said Vicus. "What should I do? You said to prepare myself," asked Gregor. Vicus thought for a second and called Merith over. "Take him to the museum. Let him choose whatever he thinks may aid him on his journey." Here is his delegation from Troy," said Vicus. He stepped into another storm of wings. Gregor ran after Merith, who had sprinted for the door. 3 staircases and several halls later, they arrived at a large chamber filled with loaded shelves. "Yes, I will see you soon," said Dulcet, but her eyes filled with... "Here is that which has fallen from the Overland. Remember, what you choose, you must carry," instructed Merith, thrusting a leather bag with a drawstring into his hands. The shelves were filled with everything from baseball cards to balls to car tires. Gregor wished that he had time to go through the stuff more carefully. Some of it must have been hundreds of years old. But time was a luxury he didn't have. He tried to focus. What could he take that would help on a trip? What did he need most in the Underland? Light, of course. He found a flashlight in working condition and collected batteries from every electrical thing he could find. Something else caught his eye. It was a hard hat, like construction workers wore. There was a built-in light on the front so that they could see in inky tunnels beneath New York City. He grabbed the hat and crammed it on his head. "We must go," ordered Merith. "We must get your sister and take flight." Gregor turned to follow him and then saw it. Root beer. An honest-to-goodness, unopened, only slightly dented can of root beer. It looked pretty new. He knew it was an extravagance, that he should only take essentials, but he had to have it. It was his favorite drink, plus it made him think of home. He stuffed the can in his bag. The nursery was nearby. Gregor ran in and saw Boots sitting happily among 3 Underlander toddlers having a tea party. For a second, he almost changed his mind and left her there. Wouldn't she be safer here in the palace? But then he remembered the palace would soon be under siege by rats. Gregor knew he couldn't leave her to face that alone. Whatever happened, they would stay together. Dulcet quickly helped Gregor into a backpack and slid Boots inside. She fastened a small bundle to the base of the backpack. "Catch cloths," she said, "a few toys and some treats." "Thanks," said Gregor, grateful someone had thought of the practical side of traveling with Boots. "Fare you well, sweet Boots," said Dulcet. She kissed the baby's cheek. "Bye-bye, Dulcie," said Boots. "See you soon." That was what they always parted with at Gregor's house. "Don't worry, I'll be back. I'll see you soon." "Yes, I will see you soon," said Dulcet, but her eyes filled with tears. "Take care, Dulcet," said Gregor, giving her hand an awkward shake. "Fly you high, Gregor the Overlander," she said. In the high hall, the mission was readying for departure. Several bats had lit on the ground and were being loaded with supplies. Gregor saw Henry hugging a painfully thin teenage girl goodbye. She was weeping uncontrollably despite his attempts to comfort her. "The dreams, brother, the dreams," she sobbed. "They have worsened. Some terrible evil awaits you." "Do not distress yourself, Nerissa. I have no plans to die," said Henry soothingly. "There are evils beyond death," said his sister. "Fly you high, Henry, fly you high." They embraced, and Henry swung up onto his velvety black bat. Gregor watched nervously as the girl came his way. He could never think of the right things to say when people cried, but she had pulled herself together by the time she'd reached him. She held out a small roll of paper. "For you, Overlander," she said. "Fly you high." And before he could answer, she had moved away, leaning on the wall for support. He opened the paper, which wasn't paper but some sort of dried animal skin, and saw that the prophecy of Gray had been carefully written on it. "That's so weird," thought Gregor. He had been wishing that he could read it again to maybe figure out more of it. He had meant to ask Vicus, but had forgotten in the rush. How did she know I wanted this? He murmured to Boots. Nerissa knows many things. She has the gift, said a boy mounting a golden bat beside him. On second glance, Gregor realized it was Luxa, but her hair had been cropped off close to her head. What happened to your hair? Asked Gregor, stuffing the prophecy in his pocket. Long locks are dangerous in battle, said Luxa carelessly. That's too bad. I mean, it looks good short, too, said Gregor quickly. Luxa burst out laughing. Gregor the Overlander, think you my beauty is of any matter in such times? Gregor's face felt hot with embarrassment. That's not what I meant. Luxa just shook her head at Henry, who was grinning back at her. The Overlander speaks true, cousin. You look like a shorn sheep. All the better, said Luxa, for who would attack a sheep? Bah, said Boots. Bah! And Henry laughed so hard he almost fell off his bat. Sheep says, bah, Boots said defensively, which set him off again. Gregor almost laughed too. For a moment, he had felt as if he were among friends. But these people had a long way to go before he could consider them friends. To cover his slip, he concentrated on finding a comfortable way to carry his leather bag that would leave his hands free. He tied it to the side strap of the pack. When he glanced up, he found Luxa looking at him curiously. What wear you on your head, Overlander? She asked. It's a hard hat with a light, said Gregor. He flicked it on and off to show her. He could tell she was itching to try it, but she didn't want to ask. Gregor quickly weighed his options on his head. True, they weren't friends, but it was better to get along with her if he could. He needed her to get his dad. Gregor held out the hat. Here, check it out. Luxa tried to appear indifferent, but her fingers worked the light switch eagerly. How do you keep the light inside without air? Does it not get hot on your head? She asked. It runs on a battery. It's electricity. And there's a layer of plastic between the light and your head. You can try it on if you want, said Gregor. Without hesitation, Luxa popped the hat on her head. Vicus has told me of electricity, she said. She shot a beam of light around the room before returning it to Gregor reluctantly. Here, you must save your fuel. You'll begin a new fashion, said Henry cheerfully. He grabbed one of the small stone torches off the wall and laid it on top of his head. Flames seemed to be shooting out of his forehead. What think you, Luxa? He asked, showing her his profile with exaggerated haughtiness. Your hair is alight? She suddenly gasped and pointed. Henry dropped the torch and beat at his hair as Luxa went into hysterics. Realizing it was a joke, Henry caught her in a headlock and rubbed her short hair with his knuckles while she laughed helplessly. For a minute, they could have been a couple of kids in the Overland, just brother and sister, like Gregor and Lizzie, wrestling around. Vicus strode across the hall. You two are in a merry mood, considering we are at war, he said, with a frown as he vaulted onto his bat. It's only an excess of spirit, Vicus, said Henry, releasing Luxa. Save your spirit. You will have need of it where we are going. Ride you with me, Gregor, said Vicus, extending a hand. Gregor swung up behind him on his big gray bat. Boots kicked his sides with anticipation. Me ride too, she chirped. Mount up, called Vicus, and Henry and Luxa leapt onto their bats. Gregor could spot Solovat and Marith preparing to leave also. Marith was riding a bat that he hadn't seen before. Probably his other bat was still recovering. To the air, ordered Solvat, and the 5 bats lifted off in a V formation. As they rose up in the air, Gregor felt like he would burst from excitement and happiness. They were going to get his dad. They would rescue him and take him home, and his mother would smile, really smile again, and there would be holidays to celebrate, not to dread, and music, and he was getting ahead of himself. He was breaking his rule right and left, and in a minute he would stop, but for that minute he went ahead and imagined as much as he wanted. As Gregor veered sideways over the city of Regalia, Gregor was reminded of the gravity of their task by the manic activity below. The gates to the stadium were being fortified with huge stone slabs. Wagons of food clogged the roads. People carrying children and bundles were hurrying toward the palace. Extra torches were being lit in all quarters. So the city looked almost bathed in sunlight. Wouldn't you want it darker if there was going to be an attack? Asked Gregor. No, but the rats would. We need our eyes to fight. They do not, said Vicus. Most of the creatures in the Underland, the crawlers, the bats, the fish, they have no need of light. We humans are lost without it. Gregor tucked that bit of information away in his brain. The flashlight had been the best thing to bring, after all. The city quickly gave way to farmland, and Gregor had his first glimpse of how the Underlanders fed themselves. Great fields of some kind of grain grew under row upon row of hanging white lamps. "What runs the lamps?" asked Gregor. "They burn with gas from the earth. Your father was most impressed with our fields. He suggested a plan for lighting our city too, but at that moment, all lights must go for food," said Vicus. "Did an Overlander show you how to do that?" asked Gregor. "Gregor, we need not leave our minds in the Overland when we fell. We have inventors just as you do, and light is most precious to us. Think you, we poor Underlanders, might not have stumbled upon some manner of harnessing it ourselves?" said Vicus good-naturedly. Gregor felt sheepish. He had sort of thought of the Underlanders as backward. They still used swords and wore funny clothes, but they weren't stupid. His dad said even the cavemen had genius among them. Somebody had thought up the wheel. Solomon flew parallel to them, but she was deep in conversation with a pair of bats that had joined the party. She uncurled a large map on her bat's back and scrutinized it. "Is she trying to find where my dad is?" Gregor asked Vicus. "She is forming a plan of attack," said Vicus. "My wife leads our warriors. She goes with us not to direct the quest, but to gauge the level of support we may expect from our allies." "Really? I thought you were in charge." Well, you and Luxa," he said. Because really, he couldn't tell how that all worked out. Luxa seemed to be able to order people around, but she could still get in trouble for stuff. "Luxa will ascend the throne when she turns 16. Until then, Regalia is ruled by the council. I am but a humble diplomat who spends his spare time trying to teach prudence to royal youth. You see how well I succeed," Vicus said wryly. He glanced at Henry and Luxa, who were flipping wildly in the sky, trying to knock each other off their bats. "Do not let Solovet's gentle demeanor fool you. In the planning of battles, she is more cunning and wily than a rat." "Wow," said Gregor. Her gentle demeanor had fooled him. Gregor shifted his weight on the bat, and something poked his leg. He pulled the prophecy Nerissa had given him from his pocket and unrolled it. Maybe now would be a good time to ask Vicus some questions. "So do you think you could explain this gray prophecy a little bit to me?" "The prophecy of Gray," corrected Vicus. "What of it puzzles you?" "The whole thing," thought Gregor. But he said, "Maybe we could just go through it piece at a time." He studied the poem. "Beware, Underlanders, time hangs by a thread." Well, that seemed pretty clear. It was a warning. "The hunters are hunted. White water runs red." He asked Vicus to unravel the second line. "The rats are traditionally the hunters of the Underland, for they would happily track and kill the rest of us. Last night we hunted them to save you. So the hunters were hunted. White water ran red when we left their bodies to the river." It's already 33:05. Oh my gosh. We got to stop right here. We're going to get back to the prophecy. You know what? We're going to stop right here. We are on our way to war. Overlander has his things necessary, a root beer and a hard hat with a couple lights. Is that what you would have brought? Gosh, I was thinking like cannons and guns and lasers and, other things, but he literally took a hard hat with a light on it, a couple other flashlights, and a root beer. Is that really what a warrior would use? Did you find that to be a little weird? Yeah, me too. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our reading today. It is going to be a week filled with awesome reading. I am looking forward to being with you multiple days in a row. I'm hoping that I'm not asked to a bunch of meetings, but all the same, I want to say to you, thank you for being here. Thank you for reading Gregor the Overlander with me. I hope you are enjoying it as much as I am. I am so thrilled to be on an adventure quest. I like quests a whole bunch. I love that there are dangerous rats, and I love how the goofball people lead out. Vicus is just a teacher. Now I understand that. Solomon is his wife, I believe, and she's like the master of planning attacks. Luxa will become the queen at the age of 16 if she survives. Henry and her seem to have a pretty good life together, but they've lost their parents, right? That's been a big piece to that. I'm sure that will come out later. What kind of questions do you have? Oh, interesting. I like that. I like that that's good. That's a good one. Yeah. Oh, you too. Oh, yeah, that's a good one too. Yeah, that's good. Cool. Well, write them down. Send them to me. Maybe send them in the chat. I would love to know some of the thoughts that you're having in regards to this book. For those of you who have been doing the math, we're on page 132. Didn't even tell you that. Like, we're getting there at this point. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you how grateful I am to make it another day. I want to thank you for being present with us. Thank you for joining us on another adventure of reading. Remember, today is the only today that you have. So I hope you make it the very best possible today that you can. I love you until the next time we see each other. And until then, get out of here.